morning and welcome to this talk of citizen science and Indian with the butterflies by Vijay Barve. Uh, Vijay Barve does not need an introduction. He's a naturalist for ages. He's being from 2001. He's involved with various web-enabled platforms like I Found Butterflies, Indian Biodiversity Portal, and iNaturalist. His enthusiasm and zeal continues even now, as the same effect as in the first day, and he's interested in everything. He has been a staunch supporter and a pillar of Big Butterfly Month. And today he's going to talk about the citizen science and how we as citizens can get involved in butterfly science, how butterfly research and all. And well, I would hand this session over to Vijay right now with the request that kindly keep your microphones on mute, your videos off, and all your questions can come in the chat box, which we will take at the end of the session. And yes, that's most likely over to Vijay. Vijay, hi. Good morning from India.
Yes, very good morning. So let me go ahead and get started. I think I'd also keep my video off so that the sound quality and my slide presentation is good. I can start the video later. So let me start with today's topic, which is citizen science and Indian butterflies. So I've been wanting to discuss these things with a lot of naturalists, and thanks to the Big Butterfly Month for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts and idea on this topic. So if there are some people who don't know me much, I'll quickly give my introduction, which will kind of serve where I am and a little bit of background to my talk. So my name is Vijay Barve. I'm the same user handle Vijay Barve on iNaturalist. I'm a founder member of Butterfly India and Diversity India both, and these are the cyber communities that have been active for now close to 20 years. I have a background in computer science, so I studied computer science and then I did my PhD in geography. So that's my educational background. I have been a nature lover right from my childhood, thanks to my parents who were really keen bird watchers and nature enthusiasts in general. And I've been involved with bird watching initially, then got interested into butterflies and other insects and invertebrates. I've been volunteering with the three main web portals that we use for biodiversity data today. iNaturalist, I'm a curator, the India Biodiversity Portal, and the Biodiversity Atlas, which started as I Found Butterflies or Butterflies of India website to basically curate the Indian data. So that's my brief introduction and background. And now let's jump into today's topic. I don't really CITSI or citizen science has been like a term being used, especially I would say last 12 to 15 years very frequently. And unfortunately, it doesn't really have a really good definition. And just to illustrate that point, last year there was actually a paper published in PNAS, which is a very prestigious journal, and the title itself explains you that it says towards an international definition of citizen science. So that clearly says that citizen science is something which is still a little fuzzy and not really well-defined thing, and we still need to kind of understand and define what exactly citizen science is. So let's go through a few definitions. Some of them are little loose, some of them are little better, and things like that. So basically, in gist, citizen science is scientific research, data collection, and other related activities in which there is a participation of non-scientists. So anyone else who's not really scientist and participating in any research is citizen science. And that also applies to participation in a different branch of science, even though you are a scientist. So for example, suppose for a moment we say that I'm a computer scientist, and then if I'm doing any serious biodiversity related work, then that also qualifies for citizen science in some sense. So that's the very broader definition. So there is a government of US website which kind of tries to define what citizen science is. So according to them, it's the public voluntary participation in the scientific process, and what they qualify as citizen science is people at large should be involved in one of the following things. So formulating research questions, conducting scientific experiments, collecting and analyzing data, interpreting results, making new discoveries, developing technologies and applications, or solving complex problems. So unless and until general public is involved in one or many of these, it doesn't really qualify for a proper citizen science project according to their definition. So National Park Services of US, they also promote a lot of citizen science work, and according to them, again, it's a voluntary involvement of public in scientific research. So again, very similar wording you see saying help in design of experiment, collection of data, analysis of result, and solving problems. So again, we are talking of people increasingly being involved in these kind of activities, and it says anyone can be citizen scientist regardless of where they are from. It doesn't matter how old you are and what is your background. So any youngsters or any very old people, you can still be citizen scientists. You don't really have to be in any particular age bracket, and all it takes is some time, curiosity, and a sense of wonder, which is like you need to be looking for opportunities, and you need to be willing to contribute and put in a little extra time. It could be a few extra seconds or a few extra minutes in most cases, but that's what it takes to kind of distinguish from just a casual interested citizen versus someone who's really helping in citizen science. So in some sense, it's as simple as that. So National Geographic also supports a lot of citizen science initiatives, and if we look at their definition, that is also a very similar definition of uh, like the US government has done. And I also looked at the Wikipedia definition, because uh, that is a more citizen sciencey definition, because Wikipedia itself is one of the simpler examples of citizen science. So they are also they're giving all the different, say, names of citizen science. Sometimes it's referred as community science, crowdsourced science, civic science, volunteer monitoring, online citizen science, and things like that. But basically, again, research conducted in whole and part by amateurs or science. So the whole gist basically is this combination where the general public who's not professionally trained for the subject is participating. So in the context of butterflies, we can say participation by a person who's not really a trained biologist, not a trained zoologist, and contributing something serious can definitely be called as citizen scientist. But does that mean anyone taking a photograph of butterfly and sharing on a social media like Facebook, can that person be called a citizen scientist or not? Is a dilemma a lot of people have. And I will get to more details of uh, what really it should be and where everyone needs to be going. So basically, your involvement level and your commitment, that is what distinguishes you from just an enthusiast to a citizen scientist. So this is one of my favorite pyramid diagrams. So I will just explain the involvement levels and how people in some sense graduate towards becoming a real citizen scientist. So like most people typically start at this level of curious biodiversity enthusiasts, people who are curious about nature around, who say, oh wow, what is this butterfly, what is this flower, what is this plant, what is this spider, what is this insect, whatever it is, start. And a lot of them start with birding because there are a lot many active birding groups than any other group there. And in this new age of web technology and uh, availability of camera in everyone's phone and things like that, people immediately start posting on social media with a typical ID please questions. All of us have seen and see these kind of questions every day, and these are the people who start posting on Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, Telegram, Instagram, you name it, all these kind of different platforms. Then moving towards what I call as a citizen volunteer is someone who has sustained interest for some time and they're getting more and more interested into these activities, and they really want to do something. So just that will. You don't at this stage. You really don't need to have any knowledge or any specialized skills or anything. It just needs your willingness, your interest to, oh no, I'm spending time with my hobby. Something I want to do something constructive. Just that is good enough. And then that's when people start taking notes. They're willing to put in little more efforts, as I said. Uh, Slowly with time, in 2, 3, 4 months, you're doing it consistently. You start possessing at least some basic mm, identification skills. You know, at least very commonly seen, whatever taxa you are interested in, butterflies. I'll use the butterfly example. You start at least recognizing what a grass yellow is and what a lemon pansy is and things like that. So that's where you kind of start. And rather than every posting every post as ID please, you start saying, is this grass yellow? Is this peacock pansy or things like that? So that is the change. So you're moving from ID please to kind of ID confirmation phase, and then that's the time when you should start posting on the serious portals like INHLS, India Biodiversity Portal, and I Found Butterflies. That's the time you should start it off. In many cases, people do, but in some cases, people don't, and it's our collective responsibility of nature enthusiasts to get as many people to this level, and I will explain a little bit later why. And then the third stage, the third or the topmost level, what is a real citizen scientist to my mind, is they're really serious about contributing to science, not just data collection. So they are actually looking at different biodiversity patterns and different novelty in the records and how basically it can be shared and highlighted. They are very regular in contributing to these portals. They have by this time they have accumulated hundreds, if not thousands, of records already. They are now much better in identification skills. They can probably identify at least basic 50, 100 species. They can tell difference between a three-spot grass aloe versus common grass aloe and things like that. So they have basically, they're getting to that level. And over the time, since they have collected a lot of data and that can be used meaningfully, that's where they are ready to contribute and they are ready to become co-authors on scientific paper, or at times even become first author when they find something really interesting. And anyone who is really serious about doing science, that should be the ultimate goal. So these are the kind of three involvement levels, and this is how I see the contributions that people have been doing. So to again summarize this, the three levels are: the basic level is where education and awareness is building. The second level is where you actually move slightly further and you are now actually compiling data rather than just having fun with this and forgetting about it. And the third is you are actually contributing to research. Okay, so some people might say, why should I be contributing to research? And what's the big deal? I'm having fun, that's good enough. But my argument or my answer to that is, research is not just research per se. Always any published research gets used into different kinds of policy making and conservation decisions. So research is not just because you want to publish in a scientific journal, but research is what actually opens the doors for any serious conservation and policy efforts. So whenever I say research, that also means that research and conservation and policy making and things like that. So that's the reason more and more people who really love, in our case, butterflies, should strive to get something to that level so that impacts the conservation and policy decisions. So currently, to my mind, what's happening, or which is we have a lot of curious biodiversity enthusiasts. We have probably whatever Facebook community you take, you will probably now have, with most of the Diversity India communities, we have anywhere between 7,000-8,000 to 30,000 members. But currently, they're all in this curious biodiversity enthusiast phase where people are just posting ID please, or sometimes with the ID, but they're not moving into this data compilation phase. They're probably not maintaining their own life list, or they're not maintaining their own checklist for each of the place they're visiting, or they're not seriously posting on these biodiversity portals, which automatically actually help you build your life list and things like that. So we have a large portion of that. We have a smaller portion of citizen volunteers who are seriously doing this, and even smaller portion of actual citizen scientists who are able to really publish some things with that. But as I was saying, ideally we should have something like this. We should have a very a larger, as much large as possible, the citizen volunteer tier, where everyone who loves butterflies, rather than just remaining as curious enthusiasts, should move slightly to making their data systematically available for whoever wants to do research. I definitely know that everyone does not have that kind of time, energy, rigor, enthusiasm, interest, attitude, whatever you call it. for actually publishing research, but everyone can definitely try to document our butterflies properly for the love of butterflies, not for anything else, but just because we love butterflies and we would like to see them growing and flourishing. Just for that reason, everyone ideally should try to do that, and we need to have as many people into this citizen volunteer, like kind of second tier of people, and we all should kind of systematically put efforts together to make sure we move as many friends as possible to that level, so that we have more and more data available for research and ultimately conservation. So that's the basically whole whole idea of mm, getting more organized and putting the data, and that's where the current citizen science need to go to if it is not already there, and if it is already there, it's a really good thing. So coming to the point now, okay, understood that citizen science is good, this, but what exactly, how does it, why it is important, why do we really need to put this effort? So again, it's from the same PNAS paper, which says that citizen science has amazing potential as an innovative approach for data gathering. Um, to give you an example, suppose we really need systematic data of Indian butterflies from, say, all districts of India. I don't know the exact number, but we have 450 or 500 districts in India. We need that many scientists. I doubt whether that many scientists are there and are willing to be doing that kind of field work and placed for a whole year in that particular district. And we, just 1 year is not sufficient for most of the real robust data analysis. We need data for years together, and ideally weekly data. So it's not possible to have that many people, but a lot of citizens who are really interested can definitely back this up by just documenting whatever they see every day. So that is what it means by amazing potential of data gathering. And it also is an excellent educational and outreach tool that most of us already know. We get to learn a lot of things when we start posting, and when we post, even people who are not interested in that subject, when we post on social media, people do uh, read about it, like it, ask questions. So it's a fantastic outreach tool. So basically, that's what ultimately helps scientists and policymakers to improve things. So that is how we should be. That is what we should be working toward. So now coming back to this question of where exactly citizen scientists have been contributing. So we definitely know that citizen science is not something that has, I mean, even though the term is so new, citizen science has been there for centuries. And it has been done in different ways, in different intensities, and in different fields. But citizen science, even in the field of butterflies, has been there for so many years now, so many centuries, I would say. So basically, what citizen science's major output is, you see several books published by citizen scientists. I'll go over some examples. There are a lot of interesting discoveries being done by the citizen scientists, starting from new species, new country or state level records, range extensions of the butterflies. You see uh, citizens scientifically documenting new host plant associations, new parasites, and so on. So not only occurrence, but butterfly biology also, a lot of contributions can be made if we are just little vigilant and a little systematic in what we are doing. And obviously, increasing number of occurrence records are being contributed by citizen scientists, and I will deal with some more details on what occurrence records are and why they are important. But as I was just mentioning a little bit of history of citizen science with Indian butterflies, there were a lot of British butterfly collectors who were collecting actual specimens from all parts of India and organizing them, depositing them, some taking them back for personal connection, depositing them to British Museum. But a lot of data was collected that time, and it was largely by citizen scientists or largely by people who were not scientists but commissioning other local people to say collect butterflies for them and things like that. So that's the first wave, which was from probably 1830s or 1840s till all the way till the Indian independence. Then there was the second hobby butterfly watchers. It's mostly when people uh, started getting more cautious towards conservation and just watching takes lesser resources, or some people do not want to kill and preserve the insects. So that then there are a lot of these hobby butterfly watchers who are also documenting and publishing in journals like Journal of Asiatic Society and Asiatic Society of Bengal and ANHS and places like that. A lot of these butterfly watchers have been also publishing things. And now the recent last 20 years, the digital explorers, I call them, which are after the digital era when digital cameras became really available and internet available to exchange things. So these are the three kind of distinct waves I feel of people. So uh, anyone who has been really studying butterflies, not just watching, but studying butterflies, has definitely heard of this person, Colonel W.H. Evans. He has a very beautiful book on Indian butterflies, which was, if I'm not wrong, I think published in 1930s. So he was a British Army colonel, and throughout a very active army person who has received several army medals and things like that. But he was a serious butterfly collector, and after he retired from active army duty, he moved back to Britain. He was living very close to the British Museum, and he did a lot of work with butterflies of Oriental region. Of course, he did a lot of work with lot other butterflies. I think he was specialized in Lycinergia and Hesperids, so he did a lot of work in that respect. But like, he's definitely a citizen scientist because he did not have training in biology, but he was a army person all through his life. Another person also a lot of us know, Winterblith. We have this another beautiful book by this person who was actually a school teacher, and later he became principal of the Rajkumar College in Rajkot. He also has studied butterflies throughout his life, and even after independence, he decided to live in India and contributed tremendously to the wealth of the Indian butterfly fauna knowledge and a lot of really good research. So these are some of the really early butterfly citizen scientists from India. And then coming to more post-independent era to more recent times, we all know Isaac Kemker, who's not a biologist by training. Many people might not know it, but to my mind, he's a truly citizen scientist because He's done monumental work in popularizing butterflies by writing some really early books with WWF and some recent books with Bombay Naturalist Society. So, and of course, our good friend Milind Bhakre and Hemant Ogle, who have brought out a really beautiful book. We all heard about the story of their making of their book, and uh, we all know how rigorous work they have put in, and these people are the ones who have really set example for us. And as I'm repeatedly saying, everyone should not and need not be doing that, but we definitely can contribute our bits because we all love butterflies. And you are going to hear this statement a lot more times from me just within this talk. Then coming to more citizen scientists publishing more research papers. So a lot of you might have at least heard of this name, Purnendu Roy, who's also a developer of the I Found Butterflies website. Initially, he's the one who has been developing it, who's a very serious butterfly hobbyist, and he has actually described a new species from Arunachal Pradesh. And yeah, so that's really a good example of what a citizen scientist can do. He also has another paper of like range extension, and then we also have some examples of people collaborating with scientists. So Ankita Gupta is a really amazing scientist in the National Bureau of Agricultural Insect Resources in Bangalore. She works on parasites of mainly Lepidoptera. She does a lot of really good work with parasites, but so what she has done is she has collaborated with some of the butterfly enthusiasts. So Dr. K. Saji, a lot of us know he's done a lot of work with documenting early stages of butterflies in the Western Ghats. So while he was doing that, he found some of his caterpillars were parasitized by some wasps and some other dipterans, so flies, and so he collaborated with Dr. Gupta, and then they basically came actually ended up describing some new species. So that's another way how people can collaborate, and all thanks to this internet age and exchanges that could be quickly done using these media. So a couple of other examples, Ankita working with Ravindra Bambure, who again found another parasitic wasps, and yeah, so basically work with butterflies. And then this is another work where a team of scientists and citizen scientists working together to really make a detailed documentation. So Rohan and Kedar, these two people are definitely citizen scientists because they are into totally different field, but they immensely contributed to this documentation, and they are authors of these papers. So these are the kind of things that people can contribute and do to do research. So why things are in some sense easier in digital era? To my mind, there are two major changes that happened last 20-25 years. One is digital photography, both the cost of the equipment and the cost per picture have fallen very sharply. I remember, like, before digital photography, whenever you are using film or a slide, every click, it used to be in the minds. Okay, when I hit a click once, I have to pay like 10 or 12 rupees, including the film, the processing, and everything. So every click in the mind will cost that much. So you are really, really stingy and careful because you don't have unlimited resources to keep on buying film and developing it. So you had a lot of limitation on what you can really document. So you'll tend to really focus on certain things. But now with digital photography, you can take 10,000 snaps and still your initial investment is what you have, and you can just copy and delete, and so you don't have to basically keep on thinking of charge per click. And another thing is connectivity through internet across the globe. You can very quickly share and ask questions to people and discuss uh, about the possibilities and learn very quickly. Also, you have a lot of internet-based resources and portals, and now with new wave of artificial intelligence, you can get uh, fairly decent identifications of your photographs. So these two things in the digital era are changing things drastically. So I will just quickly take you through the journey of Butterfly India. Butterfly India is a name for the community that we have been using for close to last 20 years now. So it started with a Yahoo group in October of 2001, just with a casual conversation with some of the friends. So I remember I had a conversation with Krishna Meg, and I knew Krishna Meg much before that. So I still remember we were talking of, we listed like 8 or 10 names of people who are, we thought are probably interested in butterflies, and we were talking of, actually there are about 25-30 people in India who are interested in butterflies. So let's try to bring them together, and that's how we started this Yahoo group called Butterfly India. And within a month we had like 100 members, and we started communicating, asking people ID, sharing photographs from different locations, and that's how we started the Butterfly India and Diversity India. Then uh, as I was saying, we started with Yahoo group, then slowly there were other avenues available. Flickr was the one where we, it was very popular with photographers, so a lot of butterfly enthusiasts started posting pictures on Flickr, and then we had a small Flickr community so that we don't have to share each and every picture, but we can just, in the Yahoo group, we can just refer a Flickr album. And then with times, Facebook really picked up in India. We started a community on Facebook, and then things kept happening. And then that was the time when we actually launched I Found Butterflies, the uh, uh, butterfly side. Around that time, the India Biodiversity Portal also started, and we started posting the records on that. So basically, from education to awareness, that was the time. Like, it took for us, it took around 10 years, not just for us, but for technology to mature and for things to be available. And then we had this portal slightly later on, and actually started becoming popular in India. Even though it started little earlier than that, it was not much known in India. But now that is something we cannot ignore. The growth iNaturalist has been witnessing over last several months in India. That is something we cannot just ignore. We need to be using that and curating that data and using that elsewhere. So these are the three main portals, and somewhat parallelly, not really in linear fashion, collaborative discoveries and research publications started coming up. Most of the publications that I mentioned here, uh, the research papers as well as the published books, they do acknowledge the contribution of the Butterfly India community in some way or the other. So these are something that kind of brought all the people, all the citizen and the scientists together to really work collaboratively and start publishing together. So that's the journey of Butterfly India for those who are not familiar with what has been happening in the background and how this community is so mature. These are some of the steps that we have been taking. So again, coming back to why is citizen science that important to butterfly studies? We already discussed a lot of things, but now I'm focusing more on occurrence records on butterflies, which every one of us can easily do and document. So for occurrence records, why are they important? So basically, we can look at a lot of very interesting spatial patterns in the sense the distributional patterns, looking at why is this particular species restricted to only these many states of India, or is this species seen all over India across all the way, sometimes all the way up to Australia, sometimes this side all the way up to Africa and things like that. So what are the distribution patterns? The butterfly that I'm looking at, where all it can be seen. Can it be seen in this place or that place? Suppose I am in the state of Assam and I see a butterfly. The question can come to my mind, can this be also seen in Western Ghats or not? Will that be the same species or different species? All these curious questions to get answers. Basically, you can use these occurrence records. The seasonality, which is very interesting, what months you see them, what months the butterfly is flying, what months they lay eggs, what month you find the caterpillars and things like that. Do they emerge like only once in a year, or do they emerge all around the year, or are there two large peaks? All these things are very interesting to understand the biology, and if we really need to protect the butterfly. So seasonality is very important. So having records every day, every week is very important to track migrations, where large populations were seen in one place, when they disappeared, where they started appearing in other places. These things give you idea about the migration, species interactions. Sometimes we don't realize, but when we are documenting a caterpillar of any butterfly, we should make it a point to document the plant. If there are any flowers, or take a little long shot, take few more shots by which we can also identify the plant. You never know, that could be a new host plant record for the species that you're looking at. So it's also good to really try and get it properly identified, that particular species, or as I was mentioning, some parasites or predators and other biological interactions. And over time, when we have such a nice detailed data, we always keep on talking about anthropogenic pressures, that cities are expanding or we are polluting, this, that. Are there some species really disappearing? Are there some species which were seen in better numbers are not seen, or are not at all seen now? Things like that. We need data at a really fine scale, and for that, in some sense, everyone need to be documenting what's around them on everyday basis. Then only we can get all these patterns, and then only we can really study and learn and protect these butterflies. So this is the importance of just one very simple thing, that is recording occurrence of a butterfly at given place and given time. So what exactly is a biodiversity record? So a primary biodiversity record or a biodiversity occurrence record, different names, basically a combination of what was seen, where it was seen, when it was seen, and who recorded it. Who recorded it is simply for if I need to get a little more information about that, I can always ask. If suppose I know, okay, this record is recorded by Anuruddha, I can always message Anuruddha and say, hey, I saw this picture, I see this and this in your picture. Can you tell me more? Did you see this or whatever I want to find? Was it raining that day or whatever it is? So things like that. So who is important for that to get more information? Where and when is very important to note. I would say what is not that important in the sense if you have decent pictures, you can always get someone's help to find out, and you don't really need to be knowing all the names and species and subspecies. That all can come from other experts, from other experienced users. But when and where are very important things, and that you should not, never miss to record and report. So these are basically, this is a biodiversity occurrence record is what we need to collect more and more in millions, I would say. So what happens to these records? How they are useful? So uh, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this particular intergovernmental initiative that is called as Global Biodiversity Information Facility. This is basically on lines of UN or something. So after these CBD conventions and all, it was decided that there has to be a good facility to store and curate biodiversity information. So GBIF is the organization which has um, all the countries that as its members and a few large organizations like IUCN and WWF and things like that. So that's how the Global Biodiversity Information Facility is founded. And over last 15-20 years of its existence, it has been collecting biodiversity data, and now it has, as of now, it has 1.6 billion occurrence records. And if you look at this graph, it actually 80% of them are in the form of human observations. So these are the records we are posting on eBird and INHList and India Biodiversity Portal are the records which are making all the way up to Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And why it is important is in last 10 years, there are 2000, more than 2,500 research papers published using the data just in GBIF alone. So my bit or my drop of the information that I share there becomes a huge ocean of information, and then that can be used in research and ultimately conservation efforts. So that's the reason why we need to strive to get more information of GBIF if we really need to protect species. Coming to INHList, I have some more numbers. So if anyone is not aware of what INHList is, it's basically a little bit like Facebook for biodiversity. It's basically a social network where anyone can submit a photograph that they encounter with date and place, and then identifications would automatically slowly come from the experts. There are also some artificial intelligence tools available to explore that. And if you look at that, since 2008, number of records being generated on INHList are almost doubling every year. So it's a phenomenal growth in that sense. And just to look at INHList data itself, more than 150 research papers have been published using the data from INHList, which is also a lot of work, uh, lot of good use of that data. Coming to India, coming to our own IFB, I found butterflies. I found butterflies data also. I just looked up on Google Scholar, and I just found that there are 41 research papers citing the data from I found butterflies. So in some sense, I found butterflies data is limited only to India, and it's really still maturing. And still there are already 41 research papers published, which means we are putting this data accumulated from all of us to definitely a good use. So that's basically the importance of putting this information on biodiversity portals and being used into research. And as I was saying, whenever I say research, that also means at some point of time it is going to influence policy as well as conservation decisions. So coming back to how people contribute the data and how they should contribute. So for really new people who are just starting watching butterflies, you start by exploring, you go out with your friends, you take some photographs of interesting looking things, you share them on social media like the picture here, you seek identification, people help you, people like and share your photographs, they say wow, nice, beautiful, and then you keep the record of what you have documented, or in many cases you just forget about it and move on, and after a month or two you again capture the same thing and again ask for ID. So this is a very typical cycle of what people do on social media, and this I'm just telling from my last 19 years of experience. But what really should happen is same. You explore, you go do photo documentation, but you don't share. Rather than just sharing and forgetting about it or expecting, you publish. You publish on iNaturalist, India Biodiversity Portal, or I found butterflies. And by publish, I mean you simply go and post that record there first. You do not have to know the idea of that. You just upload the photograph, you tell the date and the place, and identification. If you know, you give. If you don't know, there is always someone who's going to help. So you publish. After publishing, you share. So many times, most of the times, I actually share my photographs with a link to a iNaturalist or a IBP record, so that people who are providing me ID can also go on that website and curate my data in some sense to give ID. So I share, and there also, if I don't have ID on iNaturalist on social media platform, I ask, okay, what is this? I seek ID from people, and then I still continue to get likes and shares and wows and all these things. But the change is I can later on go and use my own photographs or records, or others can use it for something meaningful. So to give an example here, if I ask most of you, how many species of butterflies have you documented? We may not have the exact answer, but once we start systematically putting things together, I can see here, okay, I have so far posted 976 observations of butterflies, and I have documented 299 species or taxons, and 170 people have helped me identify this. So in some sense, we start generating our own information bank and data backup and statistics and whatnot, life list and lifers and everything can kind of start falling in place automatically when we use something as simple as this to systematically document our things. And you can publish your old data also. If you see just in this screenshot, I found a few pictures from 2007 and 2003 when I just had my new digital camera, and for some reason I did not access and posted them on. And actually still this month, so this was like last month, 26th of August is when I found this particular set, and I have posted those. So you can post old records too, and it's really useful information. And if you have it, I would highly encourage you to look through this your hard disk, take out your photographs, and start posting. And we really have Big Butterfly Month going, which is a really nice kind of reason for you to go ahead and start doing that. So that's the ideal scenario, and that's what I think we all should strive to do. So I'm almost towards the end of my talk. This is just a quick diagrammatic representation of what all we have been talking. So this is just a photo life cycle of a biodiversity photo record. So um, how do we take pictures? There are two main possibilities according to me. So one is we plan to go out for a weekend nature trail or walk, or basically you decide, okay, I want to go out and look for something. Or there is another opportunistic encounter. I'm just sitting uh, outside in my backyard and I see a butterfly or a bird coming, or I'm walking from my office to my bus stop or a car parking, and I see something by the side of the road. I have my cell phone or camera, I take a picture. So either opportunistic or planned. So what happens typically is you uh, manage your photo resource. You need to edit or resize sometimes before you post. Then you actually post these records first to a biodiversity portal. From this, don't jump to posting photo records on social media. Go to a biodiversity portal, and from there, you post it to social media so that you can provide a backlink, and anyone who's trying to help you can also on those portals. And what also happens in the background without your knowledge is once this data is curated, once you receive ID and other details of that, it is automatically passed to GBIF and can be used in research. So this kind of becomes a process which you don't really have to do anything actively, but you are still contributing. And once you have your photos identified and you get more information and comments, you can again always post them on other things, like you can blog about them, write articles, use it in a newspaper article or whatever it is. So that's how I think a biodiversity photo should be used. In most cases, photo management and posting on social media, and that's where things stop. But we should also make sure that it goes through this route so that we can still take it to social media, but also send it for research in the background. So that's kind of gist of my talk, and that's my appeal for the modern age, digital age people. And just a lot of people say, can I contribute? I don't know anything about butterflies. So what I would say is absolutely anyone can contribute. You do not need knowledge of butterflies at all. You do not need a sophisticated photography equipment. Just your cell phone camera is good enough in many cases. The only thing you need is a little bit of will to put in a few minutes extra. In once you get used to it, I probably take between 30 seconds to 1 minute extra to quickly post it on a biodiversity portal and then share that link to uh, other social media. And I'm sure I see some people who are attending the talk are going to say the same. There are people like Aniruddha and Firoz and Anil ji and all. They all also do that, and I'm sure they are going to say the same thing, that it just takes a minute or two extra, and you are doing a great service to the butterflies that you love. Finally, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the Big Butterfly Month organizing team to giving me this opportunity to talk to you all and interact and share some of my thoughts. I hope you found this useful, and all the Diversity India members and the biodiversity community at large of not only India but abroad to kind of help me with lot of my identifications and learning about it. And I think that's it. I'm already a little over time, and let's uh, let's do some discussion. So I already see a couple of questions here. I will try to go through them, and if there are any questions on Facebook, we can take them later. So
Yeah, thank you, Vijay, for this talk. That's very informative, and we all stand educated about how we can contribute towards citizen science. To go into the question bank, there are a couple of interesting questions. Nishan, the question is interesting. He says, one thing I always hear about is a doubt about geo-privacy of species recorded in biodiversity portals.
mhm.
Can Vijayji clarify about this? How safe the recorded about various animals are, especially when the location is tagged with it?
Okay, so it's a really good question, and I have heard this question multiple times, and I have myself posted this question to the people who have been running the biodiversity portals. So I would just quickly tell how it works with iNaturalist, because I interact more with iNaturalist for my own reasons. So iNaturalist, if any species is uh, listed as threatened in any of the IUCN categories or by any of the agencies, they have this internal tagging system, and for all those species, uh, the typical information technology term is the data is spoofed. So basically, you see the data point, but that is not precise, or you cannot download the data point unless the user gives you right to download. So you know roughly where it is, but it is not the precise point. So the system stores the precise point. It has the data for later use, but for anyone who's trying to just browse and look at the data, the location is manipulated and shown in a different place. So that is how geopiracy is taken care by iNaturalist, and every portal is asked this question, so they have their own mechanisms. So we don't really have to worry a lot. Another thing is, if you are really super worried about it, you can also give a larger uh, kind of radius, and you don't give a very precise location basically if you don't want to give. That also can be done, but basically it is taken care. And another anecdote I would like to tell here. I used to work with medicinal plants earlier, and uh, my boss, my supervisor was additional PCCF, and always anytime this discussion of precise location being available comes, he always used to say, you don't worry about it, the poachers always know much better and precise locations than what you know. So you don't worry about you telling the locations to the poachers. They already know more about it. So that is another thing. But of course, I mean this point is definitely legitimate, and these portals are taking care of these in their own ways.
Okay. There is a question from Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a moment. Yeah, Nitin Kavathankar. He says,
Mm-hmm.
"Is there any fear of shared from any that leads to my question also. What is the copyright procedure for the data that you're putting in, and what are the chances of data being stolen or somebody else publishing your photographs and your data and those kind of stuff?
Okay, so if you are sharing your photographs on any other social media, that has more chances of getting it uh, misused, because social media is not a real publishing platform and you don't know. But if you are publishing it on a portal, record is maintained there, so anyone can go and check, and you have like precise date when you have published it and where you got it and everything. So it's actually, in some sense, I would say it's more protection than uh, being stolen. And a lot of my friends also treat it as a data backup of their own data, because I know a lot of people who have lost a whole hard disk full of data because the hard disk crash or whatever happened. But if you have all these data processed and posted on time on these portals, you can always download your images back from this portal. They may not be of the 100% resolution. They may not be really like a 5 MB or 10 MB file. But you at least have a decent resolution that you can use for a lot of purposes. So I would publishing your record first is more security than a threat for getting it stolen.
And the copyright aspects, Vijayji,
Okay, so
who has the copyrights of
yeah, so copyright aspects, most of the portals let you set what copyright you want to give. So if you're a person like me, I like to post all my photographs at Creative Commons. My philosophy behind it is those those living beings belong to Mother Nature. They are not my property. It's just the photographs that I am taking. I'm just doing service to nature. So I just want anyone to use them. If they decide to acknowledge me, well and good. But iNaturalist for has all these 5 or 6 different copyrights available, and when you are posting your photo, or you can set a global setting, so every photo you post is either totally copyrighted or Creative Commons or Creative Commons share alike or whatever it is. So all these options are available in most of these portals. Was that the question, or did I answer something else? Santanu?
no, that was the question that you answered. Yes.
Okay, okay. Any other questions?
So the similar questions. Is there any fear of shared observation data that can be stolen? That's what we discussed right now.
Yes. So
Hmm.
in terms of yeah, your
So
photograph being stolen or someone actually trying to go and capture.
Uh, actually, Vijay, coming to think about it, this is one major reason why people are not publishing. If you are publishing in social media, the photo is so degraded that cannot be used anywhere else. But publishing to these sites with
Mhm.
these specific length, breadth, and resolutions, somebody else can take this photo and make a book out of it, or maybe something like that. That is a fear that normally people have, and that has been shared with me by a number of people a number of times. So this is one
Right.
reason people are not not very attuned to posting in the biodiversity portals like IBP, INAT, or Butterflies of India.
But
Those kind of.
uh, right. I think uh, uh, coarser or a less resolution image on these websites. So that's not a problem at all, I feel.
Okay. Sorry. One more
Okay, there
thing
is
that,
one more question. If
yeah, that's
I
I was
upload my data on INHLS, IBP, and I found butterflies, will the data get duplicated? Some observations simultaneous. So Nishad, that's correct, and I won't really recommend you to spend so much time doing that. I mean, as long as, to my mind, as long as you post on one of the three websites, it's good enough. Why three options, and why I'm saying one of the three is uh, every portal has their strength and weakness, and so it's like you cannot only sell a Tata car or a Mahindra car. Some people also need Honda or Hyundai or whatever it is. So people need to have options, and all these three websites have their own strengths and weaknesses. And as long as you are posting on one of these, it's good enough. I'm just saying you don't just leave it at Facebook and WhatsApp and Telegram, but uh, spend a few minutes extra before and post it on these first, so that the data is stored there for longer time, in some sense for perpetuality, because if the data goes from INHLS to GBIF, GBIF is supposed to store it perpetually, because that's the intergovernmental mandate for that particular organization. So, but if you really are interested, you can go ahead and do it. And GBIF is working on mechanisms of finding these duplicates and keeping them aside if they come from multiple sources. So if you are really keen and you have time and energy, you can always do that. But I tend to do it on one or two, depending on what it is and how much uh, value it is going to add to each of these things. So that's my take on it.
great. Vijay, there's a question which is how can we encourage students to start using iNet mobile app? They are kind of averse to that.
Okay, so I have seen a lot of professors now using INHList as a class assignment itself. Using iNaturalist on mobile is extremely easy. I think Big Butterfly Month has a 2-minute video on it. iNaturalist website has a video on it. It's extremely easy, and I've seen now some professors actually using it. Like it's like one of your practical. You have to submit 5 records on iNaturalist and provide the link to the professor. So once you are forced like that, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but I would say it's mostly good. Sometimes I have seen same picture being posted by 5 or 6 of the members of the same class. But that kind of cheating happens everywhere. But otherwise, it definitely adds some more new data, and definitely adds a very good opportunity for these school and college children to learn a lot by the amount of comments that they might get. And you never know, they might come across something really interesting, and get a lot of information on that too. So that's how people are doing it.
We do not really have questions in the chat box right now. If anybody in this room has any questions, can unmute themselves and ask before we kind of end the session.
Yes.
Mm.
Any
Yeah.
of the Any of
The
the
question
INHL
comes
list
in,
power users want to share something, that's also fine, I think.
what is your opinion on future outlook for citizen science? That's a question that came up in FD.
Okay, so citizen science has been really growing particularly last 5 years. It has seen a really big push from all the places. As I was showing some examples, like the American government has a exclusive citizen science website for any government agency to utilize it to, in some sense, recruit volunteers to do a lot of citizen science stuff, and increasing number of people are getting uh, a lot of knowledge and the ability to communicate with scientists and publish something meaningful. So it definitely has a lot of future. And as I was saying, scientists cannot be there every place every time. So citizens can add a tremendous value in that sense. So yeah, I see a lot of growth. How innovatively it will be used by uh, different organizations and with all the new technologies. Like cell phone app, 5-10 years back, we did not really think about it, but now almost every citizen science project is having its own cell phone app, and more data can be more quickly captured. So that's how I see it.
Morning, Dr. Barve. This is Anil Kumar Verma.
Hello, Anji.
Okay. I just wanted to know, is there a mechanism to know, if scientists are working on some projects where we can actively contribute or really specifically look for things which those projects are looking for or things like that?
Right. So the information is typically passed on social media platforms, or sometimes they create on INHL list. To give INHL example, they create a INHL list project, and they start accumulating data. One example, some of you might have already noticed. On INHL list India side, there is a project about squirrels, and there is a group in ISER Tirupati. Dr. Nandini is working on it. So she herself and her students are actually going through all the squirrel records. I was not aware there are about 40 different species in that group seen in India, and they are curating and trying to use that data in some future analysis. So what they have done is they are also reaching out to people and kind of appealing them to capture more squirrel photographs and upload, so that they can actually find some distribution boundaries when they have more fine grade data. So opportunities like this are going to come, a lot of them, very soon.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Any other
Yes,
question, comment?
none. So I think we have reached the end of this program.
Mhm.
And once again, I take this opportunity on behalf of Big Butterfly Month and thank Dr. Barve for taking his time and coming out here explaining to us a lot of things and making us aware of a lot of new things about citizen science. We wish to have future such talks in future also with him as an early progress. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining on this bright
So I
Sunday
have
morning.
two really very quick comments before we log off.
Mhm.
One is the gist of my talk. I would really like to see more posts on portals than just social media. So let's do it so that we have more and more information available. I don't know if you people have noticed, but we already have 6,000 records posted, butterfly records posted in last, what, 12 days now. So Big Butterfly Month push is really working. We have crossed 50,000 verifiable butterfly records for India. And another thing, because all of you are butterfly lovers, you all have already heard of it, but if you have not, we are polling for the India's national butterfly. So please go vote and try to reach out to as many people as possible. We are hoping to get at least 100,000, at least 1 lakh votes by the end of the voting period, so that we really have a fair candidate for the national butterfly. So these two things I would like to say, and thank you so much for attending and this opportunity of interaction.